Yeah.
And actually, in 2013, when I crossed the country the first time, we took Route 66. And it was fascinating because some of the people who own stores on Route 66 really are into the history of it. And talking to them about it is simply fascinating. But also, we were recreating history in that Route 66 was the first time you could travel a great distance with relative ease, because there were gas stations every 100 miles or so, eventually. And you could travel from LA to Chicago in a car and expect that you could fill up it with gas. And so that was unique. And then when we were doing it with electric vehicles, the charging stations were there, but they were kind of, they were just barely there. We could barely make it to the next one. And we barely used charging stations anyway. We actually did about 100 miles a day.
But you had talked about the logistics because you had a group of different ranges.
Yeah.
And you have a bicyclist.
Right. And only the Leaf could use J-plugs anyway.
Okay.
I could use like 2 outlets, 2 standard outlets at a time, which would double my charging speed, but I wasn't using both Elcons on that trip.
Okay.
I actually picked up the second one. I had one.
Okay.
I picked up the second one when I got to Hollywood Electrics.
So what was your typical day like during that trip?
There was no typical day.
Okay.
I loved that trip. I loved the people on that trip, and it was incredibly poorly organized. So, not to say anything bad about the people, but the organization of it was really atrocious. And so we were traveling for 44 days straight, and every single day was amazing and incredibly frustrating. Not just regular frustrating, but like amped up, really, really challenging. And you would think we would get some kind of groove. But we literally never did.
Was it due to the different ranges of the vehicles, or was it just others? Was it external things?
It was a little bit that. It was a little bit personalities. Obviously, with the vehicles, you've got 2 low-speed and 2 high-speed vehicles. So I always thought that the motorcycle would be with the car the entire time, and we had similar ranges too. Like I could go basically the same range as the Nissan Leaf, and the electric scooters and the electric bicycle could stay together. Well, the people on the electric scooters were mother and daughter, and the way they related to each other was fairly assertive. And the bicyclist was a laid-back British guy, and he could not stand being around
the scooters.
These 2, and they were getting along. It wasn't that they weren't getting along.
That's how they got along.
It's so fascinating.
That's how they got along.
Yeah, it's just different people relate to each other differently.
Yeah.
So they would just kind of like nitpick at each other a little bit. A lot of times they were fine, but he just couldn't stand that. So then the car spent most of the trip with the cyclist, because the guy driving the car, also a low-key guy, and he was happy to wake up super early. That was the other thing. The scooter riders were not ready to go at 7 a.m. And the cyclist needed to get to the next destination, 100 miles a day, every day, no rest days.
Wow. Yeah, no rest days. Wow.
Yeah. And he needed to get there in time to get to bed so he could get enough energy to do it again the next day, right? So part of it was kind of survival. And the first 3 days were crazy, and we got in way too late, like at 11. We didn't get to sleep until 1 because we were figuring out batteries. It was funny. I didn't need to bring my batteries into the room. The bicyclists and the scooters did. But because I was literally the only person who drove an electric vehicle in my real life. So I was used to charging batteries at night. I was just used to, it was a habit, plug in the motorcycle. So I took on the charging of the bike for a while, and then the scooters for another time. But I just took it over because I just could coordinate that easier. And I also arrived before everyone else most of the time.
Okay.
So I guess a typical day, if we had one, on the Ride the Future tour was I would get going around 11 because I would try to help get everyone else going as early as possible, but somehow they couldn't get out until the hotel kicks you out, right? So cats. I was just trying to get them going, and it never ended up working, but that's okay. The cyclist in the car was already on the road at 7 or 7:30 a.m., partly to beat the sun, because a lot of this was in the south, a lot was in the southwest in the desert, and it was hot, and he wanted to ride as much out of the sun as possible. then I would just enjoy the ride basically on my own. Because again, the car is with a cyclist going 19 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
The scooters have a top speed of 30. I'm not doing 30 miles an hour on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
I actually averaged 45 miles an hour. And I stayed off the highways because, again, I wanted to like get as much range. And I would find a place to eat. A lot of times I would try to hook up with the cyclist and the car driver for lunch, and we would get that. But I would find a place to eat, ask if I could plug in. I found every restaurant across America has an outlet outside the building, in the back, next to the door to the kitchen. That's where the outlet is. You learn weird things on trips like this.
Funny.
And then I would get to the hotel generally first, and we had a truck that would carry the extra batteries and extra gear, and so I would kind of help offload some stuff there, and then other people would arrive. Like normally they'd arrive like right around sundown, and
which is kind of late in the summertime. We're talking 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's like 8 o'clock at night.
Well,
so
they started at 11, so that's all right.
We didn't have much time to like get together as a group and like meet. And figure that out. And here's another thing that's really interesting. You know those commercials for Verizon that they have this amazing coverage? It's true. I had Verizon. The Nissan Leaf driver had Verizon. Everyone else had AT&T or T-Mobile. And nobody else had any service across the entire country. I am not being paid by Verizon, but this was incredibly frustrating because we are very far apart, and if we wanted to meet somewhere, we just couldn't like even send text messages. We couldn't count on them arriving until like the end of the night. The girls would arrive on their scooters, and they're just like, "Hey, I thought we were gonna do. Oh, I got this text message saying, here's the new plan or whatever."
Yeah. They play that game. AT&T says our network is, in terms of population covered, is 85-90% of Verizon's.
Right.
But in terms of geography, it's a huge difference.
Yeah. No, if you stay your whole life in cities, you can use any carrier.
Exactly.
It's fine. But if you actually go to the country, that was a big deal.
This video not sponsored by Verizon.
Yeah. Yet.
Yeah. So it sounds as if.
So I charged like this other guy, this third guy who crossed the country this past summer. He and I charged the same basically. I used regular outlets.
You used regular outlets, and you basically would do a midday, a lunchtime top off kind of charge.
Right. Only once did I have to do that for more than like an hour. Normally I could just do it for an hour and I'd be able to make it. And there was one day I had to stop by a hotel that had a restaurant, and I plugged in. And I needed 3 hours or 4 hours worth of charge in the middle of
the Petrified Forest.
Petrified Forest, thank you. Yes, we had just been through the Petrified Forest, and I needed like a 3-hour charge.
Oh, so the rest of the time you were just.
But every other day, I would just stop for lunch, and maybe I'd hang out an hour and a quarter instead of like a 45-minute lunch. Not a big deal. But that one day, that was it. But and some days I could make it all on one charge.
I was gonna say when you got in, did you? At the end of the day, did you have charge left, or were you in the teens? Or
well, that's one of the interesting things that people who don't ride electric don't understand. The faster you go, and you well know this, crossing the country, right? The faster you go, the faster you use your charge. When you're going every single day, you want to arrive as early as possible. And so I would glide on in there as close to zero as possible. I was always in the single digits. But that was on purpose because I knew I could make it, and I knew I could use a little extra oomph. So I would, I would always pull in the single digits. The faster you go, the more charge it eats up, or the faster it eats up your charge. So I had control over that. And once you own an electric motorcycle for a couple weeks, then you get really good at that. You know exactly how much charge it uses going on the highway, on small roads, and then on like really small roads.